Well, it's just you and me, loyal listeners. Andrew has abandoned me. Who knows when he'll be back? Who knows if he'll be back? I think I've got the rest of the century.
Sorry.
Just do it on my own. Oh, hey.
I'll never get to hear what was just recorded.
Hello and welcome to A Century in Cinema. I'm Arthur.
And I'm Andrew.
And this is a podcast where we discuss a classic film from every year. This week, we're looking at the year 1963, with 8.5 from director Federico Fellini.
As always, you can find the films that we discuss on our episodes in our show notes. We have a link in there that shows you where they are currently streaming.
I watched this on HBO Max. I know it's also on Criterion Channel, and as I understand it, it is available on Andrew Slaughter's shelf.
It's true. There used to be 2 copies, and now there's only one in a big box set. But this box set just came out last year, and it is so good. If you find yourself drawn to Fellini, it feels like an infinite resource of knowledge. I love it.
It's gorgeous. It is.
Very happy with it.
Well, very quickly, I'd like to give us a little bit of context, as I always do, for the year 1963.
Oh, yeah.
As we discussed last week, I'd say the big event this year is the assassination of President John F. Kennedy in November. And then shortly thereafter, the murder of Lee Harvey Oswald, the suspected lone assassin. Also this year, Martin Luther King Jr. and his I Have a Dream speech, the March on Washington, and the subsequent terrorist bombings in the South from the Ku Klux Klan. There's a lot going on in the civil rights movement. Anything else? The United States and the Soviet Union signed the Partial Nuclear Test Ban Treaty, stating that you can no longer test nuclear weapons above ground in the atmosphere, so only underground nuclear tests going forward. And this is meant to slow down the nuclear arms race. Let's talk about pop culture, though. The Beatles are huge this year. You have their first full album coming out. You got I Want to Hold Your Hand coming out.
Is that the Zemeckis film? Oh, you mean the single? You mean like the actual song, I Want to Hold Your Hand?
Yeah, I know that's the one that I really know, but there's a full album. It's got a lot of stuff.
I'm sorry. The reason I asked that was because in the middle of Beatlemania, Robert Zemeckis' career started with directing a Beatlemania film called I Want to Hold Your Hand. And then I thought that's what you were talking about. And then I realized you were talking about the actual song. So never mind what I just said.
They sound very related.
I mean, they literally are. Yeah. But I Want to Hold Your Hand was released in 1978. So no, okay. I'm way off.
We'll get to that.
Crazy to think that was still considered like in the middle of Beatlemania when that film came out. Yeah. And that's a decade and a half after this.
I know, right? But I do believe that this year is considered the beginning of Beatlemania. Yeah. What are some of the big films that come out this year? I do know Cleopatra bankrupts Fox Studios this year. Didn't
win any awards or anything either, which was its big thing, right? Was that this version of Cleopatra? Do I know what I'm talking about at all? I don't know. I don't know. Have I even seen this movie?
I haven't seen Cleopatra, but I do know that it's the reason that Century City exists in LA. That whole area used to belong to Fox Studios, and then they sold it off after losing so much money on Cleopatra.
There you go.
But a testament to the waning influence of the studios, all these big blockbusters that are sort of starting to fail. That this seems crazy to me. I just read this. That Cleopatra was the highest grossing film of the year.
Mm-hmm.
Still a bomb.
Still flopped.
Still a flop. Yeah.
Funny.
Weird. So this does signal really the death of the golden age of Hollywood. That a film like that can become number one at the box office and still lose the amount of money that it does. There's still a lot of great films coming out, though, for sure.
That's what I know about.
The good films.
So, of course, Alfred Hitchcock's The Birds, super fun, campy classic. And Akira Kurosawa's High and Low comes out this year. Have you seen that one?
Oh, yeah, I absolutely love it, as I do with most Kurosawa films.
Yeah, that's like an easy second favorite after Rashomon for me. I think that film is amazing.
And this is the first one he's set in modern day after making quite a few samurai films.
The James Bond film of the year is From Russia with Love. The Great Escape is released this year, which is a really haunting war film, occasionally sparkled with Steve McQueen stunts. The one big motorcycle stunt in the third act when everyone else is being shot is almost too much. But it doesn't quite go too far. I still think it's really entertaining. Charade with Audrey Hepburn, one of the funniest capers ever released. So good. The Technicolor in that is so beautiful. Disney releases The Sword in the Stone this year. I think it's one of their more underrated films. Godard, probably Godard's most famous film after Breathless, Contempt, which is his film about a film. Spoiler alert for what we're about to talk about. Comes out this year. And in his film of a film, the film within Contempt being made is being directed by Fritz Lang, and Fritz Lang plays himself in it, and it's lovely.
Oh, yeah, you've told us about this.
The horror film that Kagan and I both love so much, The Haunting, is released this year. We discussed that during the West Side Story episode, if that was edited out.
I don't know yet.
I don't either. Stanley Kramer, director of Judgment at Nuremberg, released It's a Mad, 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 Mad World, which would be remade in the 90s as Rat Race. If you've ever seen that film, it's a remake.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, cool.
Bergman's Winterlight, the second part of his chamber film trilogy after Through a Glass Darkly is released this year. And Winterlight was remade into First Reformed with Ethan Hawke in 2018.
Ooh, yeah.
Which is a fantastic film.
Ooh, so good. Ooh.
Bay of Angels, great film. The Executioner, great film.
Have you seen Bye Bye Birdie?
Oh, yes.
Want to get that song stuck in your head? There's Jason and the Argonauts. I love this film from Ray Harryhausen, the stop motion epic.
The first man I ever fell in love with in my life was Poseidon in Jason and the Argonauts when he comes out of the ocean and holds the mountains apart and they sail underneath his arm. Watching him do that as a kid, I wanted to, I don't know. I just wanted to know him a little bit.
I wanted to climb that man.
I did want to climb him. More obscure recommendations. I won't go all the way in, but these are films people should just check out that I recommend a lot. The House is Black is an Iranian film from this year. This is sort of the beginning of Iranian cinema. As far as America's perception of it goes. The Big City, Satyajit Ray. It's a fantastic film. An Actor's Revenge is a really underseen classic Japanese film. Muriel, or The Time of Return, is sort of a pseudo-spiritual sequel to Last Night at Marienbad, a really great film. Oh, and I will say Judex came out this year. The film I love from the director of Eyes Without a Face, Georges Franju.
Georges Franju.
And I think that's all I'm going to recommend.
All right. From Italy, 8.5. Director Federico Fellini. It's my turn for the plot. I know you love this film, but I think I got this.
Yeah.
I say I think I got this because this film's plot is a bit meandering. I can confidently tell you that it's about a film director who is going through a creative block. He is in pre-production for an extravagant science fiction film, but he wants to use the film to put some honest truth out into the world. And he is going back and forth on how he wants to do that. He is trying to figure things out with his mistress, his wife, the people in his life, the people he's working with, the critics who are saying he's selling out, etc., etc., etc. Within all of that are many dream sequences, fantasies, flashbacks.
And sort of a combination of it all, too.
In the end, I'd say, well, in the end, he climbs under a table and shoots himself in the face.
No, in the end, the curtain is revealed and the entire cast from the entire sprawling movie come walking down a staircase talking to each other, and it's awesome.
Would you say that in the end, our director comes to the realization that he can't tell an honest truth through his art until he learns to sort out his own personal demons. Is that what I'm supposed to take from this?
I think the film is kind of about him having to kill his ego and his inability to do so. Even in the end, he thinks he kills himself and you think the film will end, but then he rises back and says, oh, now I know how to make the film. And so he was able to overcome a few demons, sure, and he might have had to face some things within himself, but he was not successful in actually killing his dream self, his ego. And so all of the problems are still around. We see the characters walking down and we see them do this nice little merry-go-round, but we also see characters who have been in conflict with each other, still in conflict with each other in the way they look at each other. We still see, for instance, the old man who is with the younger woman and everyone involved knows that he should not be because she's going to destroy him. They are still together. So I think it's sort of just accepting that this is who he is and how he has to make art is to just sort of embrace his ego, and people who don't like that don't have to enjoy his films.
I dig it.
I think. This is a film of infinite interpretation. No two people are going to watch this movie the same way. No two people are going to like this movie for the same reasons or, even get the same thing out of it. It's a bit of a tricky one, but I think it's incredible. I'll give my history on Fellini in a second. What were your thoughts on this movie?
I don't know, man. This one was hard to get into, but I still think I really liked it. It felt like, the film pokes fun at itself at one point, saying it's like an avant-garde film without saying anything meaningful.
Right.
The film is incredibly meta. It was like the film became way more interesting once you delve into the history behind it and the production, everything going into it. It just becomes a lot more interesting once you know what Fellini was going through on set and all the reasons that the film exists in general. So I know I had seen the harem scene.
Oh my God. Yes.
And I think that must have been shown as a clip in a film history class at some point, because I remembered that pretty vividly.
Oh, that is depressing to hear.
Oh, really? Everything up until then, yeah, it's like if you show that in its without seeing the rest of the film, it's kind of meaningless, isn't it?
Yes.
Everything else leading up to that was totally foreign to me. So I must have only seen that scene at some point. I don't know.
Flashing back when I was first getting into Criterion collecting and had blind bought and watched Red Shoes, Rashomon, and Mishima, A Life in 4 Chapters in that order, and all three blew my mind. The first thing I did was go back to Barnes & Noble with my next paycheck and get more. Mm-hmm. And the next one I got was Amarcord, which was my first Fellini film and my introduction to Fellini. In fact, I didn't know anything about 8½, even though I was already really well familiar with the musical adaptation 9. And I knew it was based off of an Italian film, but I didn't know anything past that as far as its inspirations went. So to this day, I tell people their first Fellini should be either Amarcord or Nights of Cabiria. I don't recommend this film as the first Fellini film. And it's a little distressing for me as a fan of Fellini to see so many people get introduced to him through 8½ and think, oh, he's this meta avant-garde filmmaker and his movies are about his life and himself. When really this is a very unique film in his canon. It's also, there's so many layers. Like you said, this movie really gains all of its meaning from knowing who he was, knowing his style, knowing the history behind the making of the film, all of those elements. So to show this film to people in, say, a film school class setting where there's no real context given and everyone is just immediately watching thinking, oh, Guido is Fellini and that's the end of that. And there's no further comparison to be made. Mm-hmm. It's very frustrating to me because that's not what this movie is, and it's not what it was ever trying to be. And also, just to any listeners, I'm just going to harp this one down. If you've never seen a Fellini film and always wanted to watch 8½ because it's considered a classic, you should watch Nights of Cabiria first as your first Fellini film. It is such an incredible movie. Makes me cry every time I watch it. Still my favorite Fellini film.
Well, damn it. That's not what I did.
I know. I did tell you last week that you should give it a watch. I did say that. I hinted at it, but I had a feeling you didn't have time this week, which I think was fair. My first time attempting to watch this film, out of complete honesty, I fell asleep. And I started at a decent time and everything. And then, I don't know, just the opening sequence I thought was incredible. And just as things were going, I found myself feeling more and more distant until I just passed out.
It's really hard to get into this film, though, because the conflict is basically non-existent. It's such a first world problem. This famous director can't come up with a plot for his film. The stakes are so low. I don't know. I can see why someone would fall asleep watching this.
I disagree with that statement, though.
No, really? Okay.
Yes. I think the conflict in this film is extreme. I think it's the inner conflict of what we desire versus what we actually need, and our inabilities to fully maintain specific things that are probably better for us because our flesh desires lead us down paths that we can't always recover from. I think this entire film is about, the inner self and the inner battle within. And yes, it is framed by a rich Italian filmmaker through the viewpoint of a rich Italian filmmaker, and is therefore about a rich Italian filmmaker to get that point across. But I do think we can all see ourselves in Fellini and can all in Guido. And I do want to make that distinction. And it is easy to flip them up because they are obviously reflections of each other, obviously.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
But Guido is the main character of this film, and I do want to differentiate that. I think we can all see a little bit of ourselves in Guido. I think there's something really incredible about it. But again, I don't think any of that is easily interpreted on a, first of all, first viewing, and second of all, first Fellini viewing. I don't think any of it is interpretable in that way.
Okay, so you need context. You should watch other Fellini films. Okay, so this film feels so much like almost a stream of conscience, just someone talking through their problems. And I loved how Bosley Crowther put it in the review that I dug up. Of course, it's like someone on Freud's couch just like talking the entire time. That's the impression I get from this film. And if that doesn't sound like something that would be interesting to you, then I don't think you'd like it.
This film is literally stream of consciousness. Do you know what I mean by that?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
This film was made on the fly. He had everything set up with all of these actors, with this studio, with these sets, and there were all of these ideas, and he had a shooting script that no one was allowed to read. There were only 2 copies that ever existed, and he was telling the dialogue to the actors right before they would shoot them. So they were just saying those lines right into the camera. And if you go into it knowing that, immediately this film is sort of a miracle, because even the opening sequence, I mean, there is no getting past how striking, imaginative, and dense with meaning that opening sequence is.
Ooh,
of just
yes.
being trapped inside of a car, and then smoke comes into the car, and then you look over and there's a bus full of people hanging and you can't see their heads, and then you fly out of the car as if you're being sort of murdered and you're dying from the smoke and then being reborn. And then you start to fly away thinking, oh, I have a brand new life. But then there's a rope on your foot and people are pulling you back down and saying, no, that's not allowed. And then you crash into the ocean. Such an incredible way to open a film.
That falling shot, I have falling dreams, and that brought back some real chills. I just want to point out how well received this was at the time. I didn't expect this, honestly. Critics love it.
Well, that's the thing about this movie, is that this movie, when you watch it today in 2021, you think, oh, why do I need all this context? The movie just came out. But when this film came out, it came with its own context. As we have discussed on this podcast up to this point, he has had multiple international successes.
Yeah, we've been building up to this film, haven't we?
I've been building up to
all the Fellini films.
I've been mentioning every Fellini film and its reception as well. His first film to be released internationally was I Vitelloni, which is about these 4 adolescent men, and it's a very Italian neo-realism sort of piece. Mm-hmm. Fellini was also the man who cast the comedian as the priest in Rome Open City. The reason that priest was played by a famous comedian was because Fellini introduced that comedian to Rossellini. So there's a lot of inner workings going on specifically within neorealism that Fellini is a part of. And Nights of Cabiria, the reason why it's such a masterpiece is that it pushes neorealism as far as it can possibly go. There are no actual dream sequences and it never actually becomes surreal, but everything is so heightened and the locations are so gorgeous and the events occurring are so intense emotionally as well as almost ridiculous, but the ridiculousness doesn't make it funny. The ridiculousness adds to the tragic elements of it. It just pushes that version of cinema as far as it can go. And so after Night in Cabiria, he started to expand a little more and he made La Dolce Vita, which was the biggest movie in the world. It was huge, made so much money. Do you remember the scene in this film in 8½, where he's walking down the stairwell and the producer says, "You just changed my entire life. You made all these people millions of dollars. Here's a wristwatch," and hands it to him while he's just walking down the stairs and walking out? That is a joke about La Dolce Vita because it saved the company from going under. It made that producer the most famous Italian producer, and it put a bunch of stars who were only known in Italy on the map on an international way. And all the producer gave him was a wristwatch. And so he puts that in 8½. And that was news. People knew that, not just in Italy. People knew that in America. Mm-hmm. So when 8½ was released in 1963, it came with its own context and precedence. So it's hard to say, oh, this film should really be able to contextualize itself. Because when we're talking about, say, adaptations of novels or films that are a little more contained, I would agree with something like that. But for this movie, the whole reason it was made was to comment on the fact that everybody in the world knew who a director was, which really wasn't that common at this time in cinema.
That's true. Auteur Theory, born in France at early 50s, right? Like not too long ago.
Yes, Auteur Theory was very recent. And Fellini is honestly a huge reason why it became such a big discussion point.
Yeah, the idea that the director is the author of a film. And yeah, in the studio system in Hollywood, like the director is very important, but you don't see their name on top of the title like a film by so-and-so.
Right.
It's still an MGM film or it's a Warner Brothers film.
Yes, absolutely. It required to be there are layers to this film that I won't ever understand because I wasn't alive in 1963 when it came out. And I guarantee there are news articles and paparazzi stuff that came out that would have given this film even more context that we just don't even have now, that just doesn't even exist. It exists in blurbs in the middle of essays about the movie now. Fun fact. The film La Dolce Vita, there is a very annoying photographer press man who won't leave the actress alone, and his last name is Paparazzo. And it became a sort of fun thing because that movie, again, was just the largest movie ever, and everyone saw it. It became sort of a funny thing to refer to the more rat-like photographers in the press as paparazzos, as if, they were that guy in the movie. And then, of course, that just sort of evolved, and now it's a word, paparazzi.
There we go.
I could go on for forever, but we do have actual talking points as well.
Yeah, so I'll just link to the Bosley Crowther review. He does mention that you have to be patient in order to absorb this film, but he seems to be of the opinion that it is a masterpiece. It is something really spectacular.
He loved it. One of my favorite scenes is when the critic is sitting there just spouting off and off about what this movie actually is and who it's actually speaking to and what it would actually be and how it's going to be a failure. And Guido starts off listening to him earnestly and then slowly just starts to turn his attention away until he's looking at, again, more women, and he's starting to and then the critic is outside of the car now and is just a talking head in front of the action happening behind him. I love that. Yeah, I love that stuff. It's so funny. And this movie is funny.
Okay, so even though I felt so lost throughout a lot of this film, I was still laughing through quite a lot of it. I was still giggling.
And there are jokes you don't realize until it's your fourth watch. He goes into the elevator and all the priests are in there and they're all bowing their heads. And that's funny already. You're like, oh, why are there all these priests here? But then the next time you watch it, you realize he isn't going into an elevator. He's going into a confessional booth. It is the way the architecture and everything, and the door of the elevator that opens and closes has that weird little window. He's inside of a confessional booth that's just shooting up and down in a hotel instead of an elevator. And there are just priests inside of it. That is so funny, and it's something you don't notice until you've watched the movie a few times. There are good jokes in this movie.
Okay, so you kind of gave us a background on Fellini and everything sort of leading up to this film. Is this his 7th or 8th film? I know that there's some joke behind the title of this film, and I know there's a lot of pressure on him during the production of it. Do you want to go into that?
It's a very simple and easy, stupid joke of a title. It's called 8.5 because he had directed 6 feature films up to this point. He had co-directed a film, Variety Lights, and then had directed 2 shorts that were a part of larger anthology films. So that made 7.5, and then this film is 8.5. It's silly.
Was that a working title that just stuck?
No, the working title was... It's called like Fascinations of the Brain. People who are listening that know are like, that's not right. I know it isn't. I can't remember. I can't recall. I didn't put it in my notes. But there was a working title it's something about inside of your head.
Okay.
And I can't remember what it is, but it's pretty funny. So I'm sure you noticed there was no sound recording on set, and that's pretty common for Italian films at this time. A thing that was very common was that there were really famous actresses, such as Claudia Cardinale. She plays the actress who's his inspiration. He hallucinates her a few times, and then she shows up and they're in the car together. And she's like, you don't even know what the film is. You don't know how to love. And then that sort of leads into the ending. That's Claudia Cardinale. She's actually just playing herself in this film. And her voice actress was always somebody that wasn't her. And this was the first film that let her speak for herself. And her voice is so deep and sensual and beautiful, you wonder, why wouldn't you let her use that?
Yeah, why not?
But that's just something that's sort of fun to think about. The making of this film, man, where to even start? So after La Dolce Vita, everyone was really excited for the next Fellini film. And he had decided that it was going to end with a huge spaceship, and everyone was going to get on the big spaceship and fly away from Earth. And that was the end of the movie. And so he had all of these drawings made and all of these paintings made and all this concept art made, and then started to have the spaceship being built. And not only is, of course, the spaceship being built is in the film. We see it multiple times, including in the ending. But also in the background of many dream sequences, you can see the concept art of the spaceship sort of placed on walls and pushed behind cabinets and stuff like that, as if this was the whole idea that got this thing off the ground, and now it's not even going to happen. And it's just sort of like stuff behind other set pieces. It's really funny. So he started writing this autobiographical account of his life, and he started going through memories, and he presented these ideas to his 2 main screenwriters, and the 2 of them had worked with him before on many films and kind of had no idea what to do with what he had told them, and especially didn't understand how on earth it was going to end with everyone getting onto a big spaceship. So the production company sort of just started the film, and Fellini sort of just started the film. And there were a lot of sequences shot at first that don't even exist and aren't around anymore. The rough cut of this film taken down from its edit, and this was an edit that Fellini made with narration over it from himself saying, you might want to cut this scene. I don't know. Stuff like that. That ran for almost 5 hours.
Oh, jeez.
Even the score composed for this film, Nino Rota and Federico Fellini collaborated quite a few times before this film, and Nino Rota had no idea what this was or what to do with it. And he and Fellini were sitting next to each other, and Nino Rota started just playing notes on the piano. And Fellini was like, yeah, that's good. Write that down. And so he was playing random melodies, and Fellini said, yeah, that's it. And he would just say yes or no. And then he would essentially write that in the course of a week and then have an entire orchestra play these little ditties he was just writing on a piano. And I think the music in this movie is fantastic. There are leitmotifs, but they're not from the score. Certain characters are associated with certain pieces of classical music throughout the film. But as far as the score itself goes, when you listen to it, you think, wow, I've never heard a score like this. It's just sort of so free and it really fits the tone of the film. And then you find out, oh, it's just because just like every other aspect of this movie was sort of written on the fly and then an orchestra performed it and it was good. So that is kind of the vibe. I already mentioned how he was telling the dialogue to actors on set. There are multiple characters in this film who are actors who wanted to be in Guido's film and can't get their hands on a script and don't know what he wants them to do. And those actors playing those actors in real life were on set saying, we don't know what to do. We would like a script. The female character who her and her press agent are the first actress and press agent who meet Guido, and she's really hyping herself up. That woman had sent in her resume to Fellini for the past 4 films to ask to be in them, and he finally let her be in one in this one, and she's playing an actress and all she wants to do is just be in a Guido film. That's all she wants. So it's stuff like that. That's like the whole movie.
It's the whole movie. Yeah, it's the whole movie. It's just these in-jokes and meta moments.
And I think it's wonderful. I think film needed this step. I think this had to happen. And it's really interesting to me that this and Contempt were in production at the same time in completely separate countries by 2 different people who were sort of...
Remind us, Contempt was the other film about a director going through writer's block.
Yeah, the Godard film with Fritz Lang playing himself. That film was in production at the same time. Those are the 2 directors who are very much associated with auteur theory started in its roots. This was just inevitable for film in 1963 to take the next step. If you wanted to get into Andrew Cannon, into Crazy Town, if either of those 2 hadn't made their films, we still would have gotten it, because I think Hitchcock's The Birds is nothing but a huge examination and parody of a Hitchcock film.
And I do love this interpretation of The Birds, yeah.
So it was just going to happen, and this was the year. It's the most famous for its meta stuff of them all. And I think it's deserved because it was the one that was just made on the fly. And the whole movie is about a director making a movie on the fly. Mm-hmm. And it works so well.
I hadn't put it together until we really went through the films coming out this year. But do you think that has anything to do with the studio system really falling apart and directors having more say and control in the projects?
I don't know. I couldn't give you a good answer on that. I haven't done enough research.
Because you kind of say like it's an inevitable thing, like it's just going to happen.
What I mean by an inevitable thing is film becoming a very postmodern art form where it's examining itself. And that's already been happening in film to this point, but this is the first big major film that hits theaters and everyone who watches it has no choice but to interpret it that way. Mm-hmm. You know? Because Contempt did come out this year, but it was nowhere near as big and definitely nowhere near as successful. That is a very tough film to watch on your first try. Whereas 8.5, as you said, regardless of what you know, there are just scenes that are just funny. They're just hilarious. That harem scene is ridiculous. Even the way it kicks off, I love that scene so much, and I relate to that scene a lot. I think a lot of people can. Regardless of if you see the people in your head or the stored versions of your friends as sexual objects or not, which isn't even necessarily what he's doing there either, but that's sort of the implication. I think we all have these sort of versions of the people in our lives that sort of live in our heads, and we think about them sometimes. And when we think about those people, we're not, there's no way we're able to actually be in their heads and think of them as them. We're thinking of them as the version of them that lives in our heads. And this is why I think showing it out of sequence is, I would honestly call it vulgar. Because showing it out of context would make me think, 8.5 is about this movie it is, but 8.5 is about this man who does nothing but sexualize and fantasize about women, which is definitely an aspect of the film, but not the central focus of it. And also, it's not just a bunch of random women. When you watch the film, every single face in there is familiar because they've all been in the real world with him throughout the whole movie. And so it's this imaginary version of all of them that live in his head. The way that scene starts off with him and his wife sitting at the table with the self-proclaimed Jiminy Cricket character who's telling him what he's doing wrong and right throughout the movie. Then his mistress comes up. That face she makes when she makes eye contact with the wife, and there is just nobody else at the restaurant at all, so there's nowhere to hide or anything. And then she sort of tries to like hide herself or disappear for a second, and then she looks around and then is like, well, I'm here. And so she just goes forward and sits down, and then they're just sitting there talking about her like she's not sitting 2 tables in front of them. I love that whole sequence. And then the way the harem sequence starts off is him looking up, and instead of her trying to hide herself from shame, she just sits there and starts singing a glorious tune to make herself known. And his wife comes up and introduces herself, and they become best friends immediately. Mm-hmm. And you think, oh, see, it's not all bad in his head. And then it turns into a literal harem where they all are like trapped inside of his brain and can't escape. And then they protest against him. They try to kill God. They try to kill God. It's so good.
And then he whips him back into shape.
Yeah, it's weird because it is my favorite scene in the film without any question. It makes me laugh just thinking about it. But I still wouldn't show it to somebody if they didn't know the movie. So
but what do you want to talk about next? You want to talk about his wife?
I do. Do
you want to talk about his wife?
Yeah, we're there. Okay, so Nights of Cabiria, one of my favorite aspects of that film. It was the first film to ever win Best Foreign Language Feature. It was the first year that was a category at the Oscars.
Okay.
And he won it. Fellini won that award 4 times for Nights of Cabiria, La Dolce Vita, 8.5, and Amarcord, which I do think are the 4 absolutely essential Fellinis. I hate the Academy Awards, but they got it right. Those are 4 times they got it right. However, at Cannes Film Festival, it won Best Performance from an Actress, which was his wife, Giulietta Massina. And Cannes is correct in this situation because the film is incredible. But the film is incredible because she is never not the center frame, and she is divine and amazing. And the entire film is about her suffering. It opens with her at the end of a date with a man, and seems to be going really well. And then he reaches into her pocket, steals her money, and throws her into a river to drown. And she's just barely rescued in time by some kids. And that's the opening scene of the film, and it gets worse from there.
This is Nights of Kabir, by the way.
Yeah. And then he had also directed her in La Strada, which was a film about her being a young girl who is sold to this man who sexually abuses her, physically abuses her, emotionally abuses her. And then at the end, she pretty much has no choice in life but to stay with him. And it's horrifying. So their dynamic, being husband and wife, was him torturing her while she was in front of the camera. And she would go on to do one more film with him after this, Juliet of the Spirits, but she is barely in La Dolce Vita, and she is not anywhere in 8.5 at all. Instead, she is played by Anouk Ami, who is a phenomenal actress, and her name is Louisa in this film. And it's just really interesting because she didn't really get to know much about the production of this movie and didn't have much context, and had just been told by him, this is going to be sort of an autobiographical film and you are going to be in it, but not you, a character version.
Mm-hmm.
And so then she watches it, and it's nothing but how much he cheats on her, he lies to her. In his defense, she is also portrayed as a character as being someone who is aware of all of this but feels unable to stop it or help it in any way. And then she's treated to this fantastical sequence where it's all these women being sexually liberated and them all being the center of his affection. And his wife, Louisa, in the harem sequence, instead of being one of the sexual women, she is just this woman who serves everybody food and is really cordial and tells her husband everything he does is right. And that's sort of his mind fantasy version of her. I don't have any interviews with her about this film specifically to go
that'd be
off
so
of.
interesting.
Yeah, I'm sure they exist too, but I did other research, as this green bar on my audio is letting me know. It's fascinating to me that she suffered so much in his cinema, and then in one of the first films he makes without her from the beginning of his career, she's not even on screen, and I still feel like she sort of suffered the most of anybody else. You know what I mean?
Really weird and interesting point. Yeah.
Clearly, this was their relationship. This film is so striking to me because the wife character is so demure and unheard, and she's played by Anouk Ami, who was one of the most gorgeous women in Italy and in filmmaking. She's in La Dolce Vita, and she plays just this incredibly looking woman. Like, she's just the most beautiful thing you've seen on screen. And then she's in this film, and she has this really short, choppy hairdo that does not look well kept. It feels like a sort of acknowledging, I do know that you are considered one of those beautiful women and one of those beautiful actresses in the movie business. But to me, you are this sort of demure, matronly figure. I don't know.
That's harsh.
Yeah, pretty harsh.
Again, context. I need to know more. But that just sounds so sad. Was she happy? Do you know?
I believe that she was pretty happy. Yeah, I mean, she had a very strong social life as well. Okay. And she slept with other men, too. And they ended up being buried next to each other at the end, which is nice.
If it works, it works.
Yeah, I think they were just kind of the only two people who actually understood each other. And that is portrayed in 8.5 as well. Nobody on set, no crew members, no actual actors, or anyone got to look at the shooting script, except for Anouk Ami, and it's only in one scene. It's on camera, and she picks up the shooting script and scans through it. And that was the only time anyone else was allowed to look at the script. And I think it's sort of a real-life presentation of, this is the trust I have for my wife. I like that. Yeah.
I think it was really when Guido was talking with the critic that I just accepted that this is all about Fellini. I could still get things out of it. I could still see myself in certain creative situations, but I had to accept that I was watching something that was very self-indulgent. And not in necessarily a bad way, you know. It's just the movie is all about him.
I think all film is self-indulgent.
That's what this movie's about, yeah.
I agree with it. I agree with everything it's saying. I think 8.5 really is about how this is what movies are, and the more people try to convince you this isn't what movies are, the less likely you are to be able to engage with the film at all. Because the whole point is that we're seeing a sort of perspective.
And specifically the inspiration of a person, a director.
Yes, or I mean, and not necessarily a director. I think this film is about a director. You know, it could be a screenwriter. Pasolini wrote parts of his other films, including Nights of Cabiria, and Pasolini is a really fantastic director. This is just a funny quote, but after releasing his first couple films, especially Mamma Roma, Fellini said of Pasolini that he should have stuck to writing, which I think is hilarious. I love the films of Pasolini, though. I think that it's also interesting to note that after making Nights of Cabiria, Fellini went into almost a catatonic state from depression and had to go to psychotherapy for the first time when he was in his mid-30s. By the way, for people who, I don't know, people who are in their mid and late 20s, sometimes I like remembering stuff like this. Fellini didn't direct a single film until he was 32 years old. And then he had a very prolific and long and successful career.
Yes.
He helped with screenplays and stuff, but as far as directing, he didn't start until he was 32.
Good to remember because we often get so hung up on the prodigies.
Yes. And then I think 8.5 is sort of anti-prodigy in a weird way, too. I think the film is all about how you have to make mistakes to be able to be an artist, and you have to be able to accept that you are someone who makes mistakes to be a good artist.
That's true. I mean, I did really love the depiction of the director, the artist in this as just someone who is not sure what to do and just kind of winging it.
Yes.
so often I feel like those people are put on pedestals, and sometimes, I mean, I'm guilty of that myself. But
anyone who's worked on a professional film set knows that this is way more what movies are like in real life.
They are chaotic.
You've always got at least 10 people who have no idea what the hell is going on at all. And they are just sort of standing next to lights like, I hope I'm doing this right.
Yep.
There are 3 heroes besides Fellini in this film. And that's Nino Rota, who composed the score. We already discussed. Yes. Piero Gerardi, who did the production design.
Okay.
And Gianni Di Venanzo, who did the cinematography.
Okay.
Piero Gerardi was the one who came up with the idea of making because this was the first Fellini film that was entirely done on sets, no locations. And Piero was the one who came up with the idea of making things look like each other. For instance, the harem is the same set used for when the children are being bathed in the flashback at the beginning of the film. And the big bathroom he's in being lit by a light that he turns on. This is the very beginning of the movie, and it's the first really funny joke, but again, it's one that goes completely over everyone's heads. He turns on a light in the bathroom, and it's enough to light his face for the shot that's close up of him in the mirror. And then it cuts to a wide, and while he's standing there, the light is super dim, and suddenly another light is just randomly magically turned on, and all of a sudden it's a studio-lit bathroom. And that was the kind of thing that Piero Gerardi was coming up with, was making the sets have a certain tinge of, this is actually a film set, there is a crew right behind it. A lot of the stuff was from Piero Gerardi. Even the harem sequence itself was originally supposed to be a farm. I think it's incredible work. The sets in this movie are insane. Everything looks like a location.
I didn't realize they were sets. Yeah, that was great.
It's nuts. There's only one location in the entire film. And again, this is a dumb, stupid joke that nobody will ever get. The only location used in the film is the location they drive the car into when it's him and the actress, Carla. And then she comes out of the car and starts walking towards the fountain and says, I don't even know if I can be in this place. It doesn't feel like a real place. And it's the only location.
It's a joke.
Dumb joke.
Yeah, good.
They're just dumb jokes throughout this whole movie that just only the people on set and the people who read too much about this movie to enjoy it anymore can even get. The cinematography, Gianni Di Venanzo. I mean, I love the way this movie is shot in general, and Fellini had shown him the sketches that he'd drawn for the dream sequence at the beginning, and he told him, oh, this is how you would shoot stuff to make it look claustrophobic, and this is how you would shoot falling down into the ocean, and was going over all of this stuff with him. Mm-hmm. And that was kind of what got him on the set, and he'd also worked with other famous Italian directors of the time. And I think the way he shoots this film is so good. And I just think when you think of how difficult it is for modern filmmakers to make, say, musicals, where the transition from reality to song feels like too big of a jump to make, the way this film jumps seamlessly from real scene to dream sequence to flashback, and visually, it still makes sense. You always know if you're in a full flashback, if you're in a full dream sequence, or if you're in the full reality. When things start to blend, of course, the whole point is that you can't tell.
I was going to say, yeah, those transitions are sometimes so seamless.
So even this film, which is all about auteur theory and all about, oh, this one director has this vision and everyone's following it, is a huge collaborative effort. Obviously, not just from these 4 men, but these 4 men are sort of the head of it. Yes, there's endless ways to interpret this film, and, you know, I could talk about it for forever. But I would recommend this film to people who are interested in Fellini. I just think that it makes so much more sense once you're already a little bit passionate about him and already are wanting to learn more about him. And like I said, my first time watching it, I wasn't invested at all. And that was when it was the 3rd Fellini I would have watched. And by the time I came back to watch it and actually finished it the first time a few years ago, I had seen almost all of Fellini up to that point. And so it gave me a lot more context, and I was really way more invested in it. So,
well, I think I need that context, because although I did enjoy certain aspects of this film, I do find it hard to recommend. And I'm glad that you have put it into words. Yeah. I do think a lot of people who are in the creative arts would get something out of this film. You will see your own lived experiences and you will feel validated in your writer's block or whatever troubles you're facing at any given point on a project. Like I said, I really liked watching Guido just flounder and bumble around because sometimes that's how I feel. Well, before we wrap up the episode, I do want to ask you, because you've talked so lovingly about other Fellini films that I'm sorry, I haven't seen. Why is it that this is the one that made it onto the list? Why is it that 8.5 is the one that everyone always talks about?
Well, I did want to have this exact discussion. I do think as a filmmaker, you are sort of required to see this film. And I think that this is sort of the classic Fellini because it is his heart. But when you first meet somebody, you might not want to get into the intimacies of their life and their personal stuff first. You might want to know them on the surface just a little bit. And this is not a surface film. This is him diving all the way into his psyche in sort of a Jungian way. So I think there's a reason it's been established as the classic Fellini, because I do think it is. It is the quintessential Fellini, that's for sure. But it's just, that doesn't necessarily make it the best first impression. But I just want to clarify, I'm sure it came across as I did nothing but just talk for an hour and a half straight. But I love this movie. Love this movie. And watching it again today with the commentary track, I loved it just as much, if not more.
Yeah, I do feel obligated to watch it again, to appreciate it some more. But like you said, I should watch a couple other Fellini films first.
Mm-hmm. And again, this Blu-ray set that Criterion released last year, can't recommend it highly enough. Also, the entire set is still on Criterion channel as of June 27th. It's not going away at the end of this month. I think it's one of their main staples on their Criterion channel.
Seems that way.
And Nights of Cabiria was out of print and impossible to find, and I didn't pay a lot of money, but I paid a fair sum of money for a DVD copy of that movie to own it for a long time, and I was really proud to own it and show it to people. But now I don't have to worry about any of that because it's like essentially freely available to people now. And I couldn't be more excited about that because that was what I considered a really lost gem in cinema, and now it is out and about again, and I'm very happy about it. So this was a really long way of saying I want everyone in the world to watch Nights of Cabiria because I love that movie. And I think people will love that movie. Now, I would be remiss to do this episode. I'm not kidding. I actually have people who listen to this podcast who would be upset if I didn't bring this up.
Okay.
As I mentioned earlier, there is a very famous musical adaptation of this film called Nine. And the musical was called Nine because the men who wrote it were like, oh, it's the last piece of the puzzle. Now it's a full number. So it's a dumb title immediately. I actually do think the stage show is gorgeous. I love the music. And every number is one of the scenes from the movie, but it's even more obscured and even sillier and more over the top. So that's fine. That exists. However, in 2009, Rob Marshall directed a film adaptation of the musical called Nine, starring Daniel Day-Lewis, Penelope Cruz, Kate Hudson, Nicole Kidman, Fergie, and Marion Cotillard. And it is an insane movie. When I first watched it, I did hate it. I hated it. And as time has gone on and I've met more people who have watched it, I have discovered this is a huge guilty pleasure among people. I truly am not normally one to believe in guilty pleasures when it comes to films and music and media in general. I feel like if you enjoy something, you should legitimately enjoy it. And I do say that about Nine now because I've sort of had that epiphany and come to terms with it. However, Nine is not a very good movie. But I would say watching 9 before 8.5 would give you some good context for it. and it might not be good, but it is entertaining as hell. It is a fun movie. And Fergie's one big musical number, she eats the whole movie in one scene. It's just over for anyone else trying to get a spotlight or trying to do well in their solo. Fergie just dominates the movie. So I don't know. I recommend 9 to people, and I think it's a really fun movie. And I might one day do a podcast about it with Noah, my roommate, just because we've always talked about doing a podcast about that movie. And like, I don't know what we would do about it. I don't know how it would go. But we've always said we're going to make a podcast about the movie 9, and that's what the podcast is.
Weird. This is very random, but...
I mean, it's connected.
It definitely fits. It does. Well, for next week, let's do something that people are a little bit more familiar with. Let's do, what do you think, Mary Poppins?
I could go for some Mary Poppins.
All right, let's do Mary Poppins.
A little spoonful of sugar for you.
And if you enjoy the show, feel free to leave us a 5-star review and a few nice words. We always appreciate it.
Oh, thank you, Nathan Royal, for our show's music. We really appreciate it.
I just want to give a shout out to all our Patreon members who keep the show running. Thank you all. You too can become a patron and get access to bonus episodes linked down in the show notes. You're listening on YouTube now, so like and subscribe and comment down below. Tell us if you've seen the film. What did you think of it? Did we miss anything? Thank you all for listening, and we'll see you for the next one.